Massive accidental overdose. An AL lad report by Annan, uploaded to Earwid December 25th, 2013. This is the story of a mega overdose on 6-allyl 6-nor-LSD, or AL lad, in which I accidentally ingested somewhere between 1.8 and 2.3 milligrams of the substance orally in ethanol solution. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the largest dose of the drug any human has ever consumed. If you've taken more, I'd love to talk to you. First, some backstory. I was lucky enough to have received a small sample, 50 milligrams of the substance in powder form, directly from the lab which produced it. It came weighed on an analytical balance to microgram precision, so I was able to make an ethanol solution with quite accurate concentration. I created a solution of 150 micrograms of AL lad to 20 microliters of ethanol, and purchased a micropipette for dosing, intending to drop most of it onto squares of watercolour paper. I had wanted to try it out at a music festival I was going to, but not having received my micropipette in the mail yet, I decided to improvise a way to dispense 20 microliter drops. I had a small 5ml dropper bottle that seemed like they'd work, and by doing a few tests, I determined that I could reliably dispense 40 drops per milliliter, which worked out to 25 microliters per drop. I'd planned to take 300 micrograms, so it seemed that 2 drops would get me close enough. I put 0.5ml of solution, 20 drops, into a dropper bottle and took it to the festival. On day 1, I dosed a couple of friends with 1 and 2 drops respectively, the day before I would try it, and witnessed extremely positive results. So it was with great excitement that I undertook my experience. Leaning my head back, I held the dropper bottle over my tongue and squeezed ever so slightly, adding pressure slowly, until suddenly I felt a substantial amount of ethanol hit my tongue and immediately dispersed through my mouth. Shit, I think I just got a squirt. The lesson here is, always apply drops from vials onto a surface so you can watch. I looked at the remaining quantity in the dropper and it seemed quite small, though it was really impossible to judge by eyesight alone. Putting it back in my bag, I tried to stay calm and wait to see how strong it would get. I started coming up very rapidly. After perhaps 15 minutes and within 45 minutes, I was acutely aware that this would be an extremely intense psychedelic experience. I tried my best to communicate my situation to my friends, but was rapidly losing any ability to be coherent. Visual distortions were very similar to high doses of LSD, but beautifully distinct. My friends' faces appeared to be painted with neon-coloured runes, which remained constant and unchanging as I looked back and forth from face to face with absolute astonishment. Soon, the auditory hallucinations became so extreme that I could barely understand English. I began to hear voices when no one spoke, to mishear what people were saying, and eventually grew agitated, confused and distrustful of my companions. 2 of my closest friends wisely took me back to the camp, out of the main spotlight of the festival, and we sat in a tent together for some time. I had little conception of why we were there, but soon noticed that my 2 friends were looking at each other, moving their mouths silently while the words they were saying formed in clear smoke in the air between them. I couldn't speak at this point, and the visual and auditory hallucinations were so extreme that I could barely see my friends, who were only a few feet away. Eventually, my friend made a casual remark that contained a very personal synchronicity relating to the recent death of my father, which he could not have done on purpose, and which was so mind-bogglingly impossible that I became immediately and fully aware and convinced that reality is a trans-spatio-temporal totality in which all apparent separation is illusory and exists only as a cosmic tool to bring about awareness of the true reality, which might also be called God. This conviction was so profound, so stunning, so completely earth-shatteringly real that I stood up and fainted. When I came to a few seconds later is when things started to get really weird. All verbal interaction with other people was completely impossible. I couldn't follow anything that was being said to me. It was as if there was no immediate past or future. I was so completely in the present moment that I couldn't remember where their sentences had started, or have any sense of where they might be going. I only heard isolated words, which were so distorted that they sounded like some kind of alien dialect. I confused people's intentions and subtext, and became increasingly paranoid and distrustful. Soon I was living out a full-blown delusional fantasy about what was going on with my friends, which manifested in me creating quite a scene in the vicinity of camp and the rest of my friends not far away. Ultimately, I was returned to my tent with one caretaker who kept me there while I fell in and out of deep samadhi. I experienced spontaneous pranayama, seeming to hold my breath both in and out for completely impossible periods of time. At the same time, I was performing mula bandha with both a strength and focus that I have never experienced before. All of this seemed to be happening spontaneously. I wasn't actively doing it so much as it was happening to me, like some kind of demonstration at the sort of level of control in these practices that is possible with dedication and hard work. The flow of time during this experience was profoundly non-linear, and my awareness seemed to expand well beyond my camp. I seemed to be able to hear people talking hundreds of yards away, and all of this input seemed to fit into the most mysterious, completely paranoid delusional narrative of what was going on around me. I grew to believe that my friend was keeping me in this tent to prevent me from knowing about something, or to prevent me from ruining some kind of master plan, and so eventually I stormed out, determined to break his magical hold on the situation. I had been paralysed up until then by what the consequences of breaking that spell may be, but after enough time, I decided I'd had enough and had to do it. I stormed out of camp, dumping water over myself, screaming, "Nothing matters! Nothing fucking matters!" at the top of my lungs, and paced around agitatedly. Several bystanders approached to help, and I regarded them with complete distrust. I walked away and toward where the rest of my friends still remained. Who knows how many hours after this had begun, and upon seeing them, I seemed to instantly snap back into normal reality. They had these worried looks on their faces, and I just smiled and said, "Guys, time is not a linear progression of events," and we all laughed together. I took another 10 to 15 minutes to fully re-enter consensus reality, and the sensation was something a lot like Dorothy's return to Kansas in The Wizard of Oz. The whole thing seemed to have happened in an inexplicable hidden realm of reality, in which all of my friends were present, but in drastically different roles and capacities. After getting some much needed food, I was quickly in a deep, restful sleep, shockingly around T+8 hours into the experience. This stuff is dramatically shorter than LSD. I woke the next morning feeling deeply rested, happy, and somewhat confused about what had happened, but overall though I was in good spirits and feeling just fine. I compared notes with my friends who had witnessed the meltdown and spent the day at the festival totally sober, simply trying to piece it all together and attempt to understand what exactly had happened. When I got home from the festival, I used the micropipette I had received by then to measure the remaining volume of liquid in the dropper. Subtracting liberal estimates for the 3 drops I've dispensed to friends, I calculate that I ingested around 15 drops, or 2.2 milligrams. After about 6 months, I've not yet fully integrated everything, but my main takeaway from it has been to practice adopting the attitude that the whole world is a giant conspiracy to wake us up into direct awareness of the real. I'd not recommend that anyone take a dose of this magnitude, especially not in a music festival setting. It is beyond inappropriate for such a venue. I would consider pushing this substance to levels around 1 milligram in highly controlled inside settings with the intention of maintaining a totally internal focus for the duration of the trip. But this was a clear overdose and should almost certainly not be repeated. All in all, ALAD is a remarkably powerful, extremely deep and promising psychedelic, every bit as potentially useful as LSD. In many ways it is very similar, but in seemingly just as many ways it is radically different. Definitely one to explore carefully, at a range of doses for some time. If you have some, consider yourself very lucky and use it wisely.